Let's see. Has anyone in here been to the other parts of the trading psychology series, or has anyone maybe seen the YouTube videos of the trading psychology series? If not, then well, welcome to the first one. Basically, in these live streams, we go over trading psychology. In the first parts, we covered everything that has to do with the brain and how everything in the brain functions compared to and what effects it has on trading psychology, and how different emotions and behaviors in trading work inside the brain, right? So we talked about dopamine, we talked about cortisol, we talked about the cause and effect of overtrading, all that kind of interesting stuff. And in today's lecture, we're going to be talking about a slightly different thing regarding trading psychology, which is ego, identity, and self-sabotage in trading. So we're going a little further than just the biological part today. We're going into a slightly more psychological / philosophical part. And if you're interested to see the other lectures, you can check out this playlist on YouTube. All right, so without further ado, let's just start the lecture. So yeah, ego, identity, and self-sabotage in trading, right? And before we continue, it's important to understand something. Most traders, they do not fail because they lack knowledge in trading, or they don't fail because they lack a strategy, and they also often don't fail because they don't understand what risk management is, right? A lot of people have these things in place. They have watched countless of hours of ICT. They've built a strategy with rules. They understand how to manage their risk on paper, right? But what happens a lot is that they fail because their identity is incompatible with consistency, right? And in this lecture, we're going to explore why this happens, right? So it's not from motivation or not from mindset slogans, but from the perspective of how the brain actually works, right? Because behavior does not always directly originate from just logic, right? It originates from identity as well. So, first part first. Identity runs behavior. And the thing is, the brain does not experience the market objectively, right? It predicts the market. It tries to predict the market at all times, right? And modern neuroscience describes the brain as sort of a prediction machine, right? At every moment, it's kind of asking itself, how do I usually behave in a situation like this? And what can I remember from previous experiences that I can apply to the current situation, right? Or what does someone like me do under certain uncertainties, right? And once the brain answers that question, behavior will always follow automatically, right? And that's why traders often say, like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have taken that trade, right? In hindsight, they know they shouldn't have taken a certain trade. What that kind of confirms is they don't lack the knowledge because they know why a certain trade wasn't good, right? But they were acting in alignment with their identity at that point in time. And the brain will always choose the identity consistency over rational optimization at all times, right? So what this means is it will always refer back to neural pathways that were created beforehand rather than what you know is the rational, correct choice at that point in time, right? Let's see. Let's see. There we go. I think... Okay, yeah, we should be good. So, the identity is kind of a neural prediction system, right? Then we have the ego as a defense brain mechanism. And the ego is not per se arrogance, right? It's not the same thing. the ego is kind of a neurological protection that the brain and the body makes up for itself, right? The brain is wired to defend its internal mode of the self, and when that model is threatened, defensive responses activate automatically. A good comparison is, let's say we have people that have a very, very, very large ego, right? Just in general, not per se trading. Usually, that ego stems from a certain insecurity, right? Because deep down, that person has a certain insecurity, and the body and the brain wants to protect itself from giving into that insecurity, so it builds like a wall around it to protect itself, which is the ego. And in trading, losses do not only register as financial events, just as that, right? They are usually interpreted as either like I misread the market wrong, or my analysis was wrong. Maybe I'm not skilled as I thought, right? Which are all direct threats to that insecurity that's somewhere deep down, right? So this activates the threat circuitry in the amygdala that we talked about in previous lectures. And once activated, the brain shifts from just performance optimization to identity defense, right? So it starts to protect ourselves against hurting ourselves where it hurts in that insecurity, and starts to put up the wall, which is the ego, right? And a lot of common expressions of this might include, refusing to accept invalidation of a trade, moving stops instead of closing the trade because you want to be right and you don't want to give into it, re-entering a trade immediately after you lose one, so you can kind of make up for it, or increasing your risk, basically to restore confidence afterwards, right? Because you're tied to the monetary amount that's hanging on to a loss. And once you're like in that stage, the goal is no longer profitability, right? The goal is to protect self-image, and that's a very short-sighted thing to have, unfortunately, because if you just want to fix that short-term pain, you're never gonna be able to maintain long-term consistency, right? Now, why is it that losses feel personal, right? Losses usually feel disproportionately painful because the brain processes them in multiple layers simultaneously, right? So we have the first one, which is a financial loss, which is the objective outcome. Then we have the reward prediction error. It's also something we covered in one of the previous streams more in depth, which gives us the dopamine crash. Then we have a threat response, which is basically a cortisol release, so a stress hormone. And then we have layer 4, which we're talking about today, which is identity violation. And that comes in the form of, this should not have happened, right? Trying to protect your own ego. And the final layer is often pretty overlooked. People also always look at the first 3 or anything that has to do with those first 3. But identity violation is often overlooked. And the brain is not reacting to the loss itself, right? It's basically reacting to the meaning that's assigned to a loss. And when performance becomes identity, every losing trade becomes a statement about personal worth, right? So it's no longer about the loss itself, because in your brain, the loss is attached to your self-worth, right? And this dramatically amplifies emotional intensity and destabilizes execution, right? Because we want to be as systematic and consistent as possible with execution. But because we take losses so personal, and that's not even something that we might be aware of that we're doing, it might not be something intentional, because this type of stuff is often things that have shaped us across our whole lives, right? It's not something that just happens. Usually they're outcomes of certain things that happen in your upbringing, that happens in your environment. All that kind of stuff shapes you up to who you are, and that has impact on how you process things, right? It's the same way in relationships. The way you grow up and your basically your child situation, or the situation you were in when you were a kid, will often lead to certain attachment styles, right? And there's not something you can quote unquote do about it, as in it's not your fault that you have it, but it's very perfectly possible to work on it, right? So yeah, and what often happens is that we get a form of self-sabotage, right? Do we have any questions, by the way, so far, or any inputs, anything you guys want to share with me about what we've talked about so far? Let me know. Good morning, time. Peace be with you too. Hope everything is all right. Appreciate you coming in again. So yeah, let's continue with self-sabotage. And if you have any questions, make sure to just put them in the chat. It's all good. Self-sabotage is not irrational, right? It's regulatory inside your body. So when performance exceeds what the nervous system considers familiar, right, internal instability starts to rise. Because your body operates with things it can regulate what it knows, right? Whenever something comes in where it has no prior experience, it starts to try and grab everything it can to understand what's happening, right? And like a good example is fear in itself is usually just the fact that the brain cannot process an expectation or attach a probable outcome to it, right? A very good, a nice example is in human psychology or just in human behavior is, have you guys ever seen those masks that they have in like the Purge movies, where they're just blank faces of like a blank hockey mask type things? Let me see if I can get a picture. I think I have one here. Like these type of masks. I've put them in the chat right now. This is a very good example of how fear works, an explanation about what works about fear, or how fear works. Whenever we see someone, a person with a mask like this, our brain immediately senses that it's some kind of danger, right? And we associate this with danger or something that's not good for us, right? And if we just rationally look at it, why? Why would we look at this as something that's a potential danger, right? In this case, it's because our brain is hardwired to try and understand and read body language subconsciously, right? And in a mask like this, we cannot read emotions. We cannot see what that person's face is showing us, right? So basically what I'm trying to say here is, because we cannot understand what the probable outcome is, or we cannot read the situation, the brain does not know and understand what's most likely to happen next, it starts to panic, right? And it can't process what's happening, so it starts to produce cortisol in order to raise awareness, which is just a survival instinct, right? And that's why we have fear in our system. So let's attach this to something like the internal instability that we talked about. And examples of that could be, let's say we have very, very large winning days suddenly, right? Or new equity highs in our account. Like our account is at like the, I don't know, highest it has ever been. Or maybe you're like very, very, very close to passing a prop firm challenge and it's the first time ever, right? Or sudden, very extended consistency. You're very consistent. Or maybe you have, skilled up so much that your position size has increased a lot, right? And what often happens, and I'm not saying this is for everyone, it's the same for everyone, but it's just something that happens, is that instead of confidence, people start to experience discomfort, right? They're suddenly scared, or they're getting, they're walking on their tiptoes because they're, suddenly dealing with a lot of money, or they don't know how to act when they suddenly see those large numbers on the screen, right? And why is that? Well, it's because the nervous system is evolved for predictability and not progress, right? It's wired for survival and not progress in that sense. So when results start to suddenly exceed the brain's internal baseline, your stress increases, even though it's not a negative thing, right? What just happened, even if outcomes are positive, right? Because we just maybe had a large winning day, our account is growing, we're very consistent. Even though positive things are happening, our brain still, for some reason, sees it as a stress factor, right? And it starts to basically produce cortisol and adrenaline at the same time, right? And why it's happening is because the subconscious of us, inside of us, attempts to restore equilibrium, right? It doesn't want to be above the baseline, but also not below it. So it wants to basically push us back towards the baseline. And the way it does this is it often manifests in behaviors such as, for example, overtrading, after a very successful streak of trades, escalating your risk without it needing to be escalated, breaking rules late in the session, for example, leading you to giving back profits, right? And what's happening there, the goal of your brain at that point is not failure, right? It's not trying to make you fail. It's trying to normalize your emotions, right? And that leads us to the following thing, which is psychological homeostasis. And psychological homeostasis refers to the brain's tendency to try and maintain a stable internal state, right? Just as the same way your body regulates temperature, right, by either making you shake and shiver when it's very cold, tries to warm you up, or sweating when you're very hot, right? It tries to do two things to keep you at a temperature baseline. It will do the same thing in your brain, right? So the nervous system will try to regulate your emotional intensity, right? And for a lot of traders, chaos actually feels familiar, right? Volatility feels very normal, and emotional intensity kind of feels safe. So stability, patience, and boredom can be very, very foreign, right? Even threatening at the same time, even though those are the kind of states we want to work towards, right? So until the identity starts to expand, the system, which is your body, unconsciously tries to resist consistency. See the weird thing happening there? So this exact mechanism kind of explains why traders perform well briefly in short periods of time and then suddenly start to regress, right? Because the identity is not aligned yet to be able to work in a consistent manner, right? And that's why a lot of people say, or well, I've heard it before and I say it myself too, is you don't just become profitable, become the person that has the capabilities to be consistently profitable, right? Because that's the only thing that's going to lead you to it. So that's why often discipline collapses very hard when you're near milestones. And the same kind of drawdown patterns repeat, right? Your brain is not trying to sabotage your success, right? Not at all. It's just trying to preserve familiarity. And let's say you've been having very, very, very bad trading behaviors for a long time, right? That starts to become your baseline after a while, right? So basically you're trying to, every time you reinforce bad habits or you do it again, you reinforce that identity and you set that baseline lower and lower and lower. And what's happening is your brain is always going to try and push you towards the baseline to preserve the familiarity, right? So you can see how you need to be very, very disciplined to change up small behaviors and able to not let your baseline drop too much so your brain pushes you down towards familiarity, which is maybe at a very, very bad point, right? Because maybe familiarity for you is over trading, revenge trading, over leveraging all at the same time, So yeah, it kind of gives you a internal conflict, right? Competing brain systems. Why? Well, trading activates multiple neural systems simultaneously, right? The limbic system will try to seek safety and relief. Our dopaminergic system will try to seek reward and stimulation, right? We talked about that. But at the same time, your prefrontal cortex, which is the a part in your brain, is responsible for planning and inhibition, right? And under normal, calm conditions, your prefrontal cortex can regulate behavior, right? I think we talked about this quite a few times, but I think it's one of the most important mechanisms to understand in the brain related to trading, well, maybe life in general. If you understand how your brain switches from your prefrontal cortex or your amygdala in certain situations, it honestly can save you a lot of anxiety and pain in your life in general if you really understand how that works and how to internalize it and be able to identify when it's happening, right? So yeah, under stress, your control starts to shift downwards, right? And it creates a internal conflict. One system wants certainty, the other one wants stimulation, and then the third one wants long-term consistency, right? So when emotional loads starts to exceed capacity, lower systems start to dominate. And it's not a sign of weakness or something, it's just our biology, right? And understanding this removes moral judgment from mistakes and replaces it with structure. So it's the same thing that we talked about in one of the earlier streams, is that whenever your brain sees something as a threat, it wants to go into survival mode. It starts to activate our fight or flight, and it will make sure your decisions are made autonomously and not irrationally, right? It's all based on emotion because it wants to survive, right? It sees everything that's happening as a threat, and it wants to find the first known accessible way to handle that threat, right? And the more you reinforce a certain habit, the stronger the link is for your brain to understand that that specific habit that you're trying to avoid is the way to respond. And this is not only in trading, right? It can be seen in everything you do and you experience in life. Like I said, it can happen in relationships. It can happen in maybe in traffic. It can happen in I don't know, any situation in life, in conflict, in everything, right? So it's very important to understand. Do we have any questions so far, by the way? Let me know. Or if anyone wants to say something, wants to share an experience, feel free to do so. Right.
All very good stuff. Really, really good stuff.
Thank you. So, why does strategy fail under pressure, right? It's very important to understand why it will fail. Even though we have a good strategy, right? It's one part of the trading strategy, risk management, and trading psychology. Very, very important. Trading systems, they do not fail because they lack an edge, right? And we're talking about systems with an edge, right? If you have a tested system where we know that it, for a fact that it, delivers over time, I'm talking about systems like that, right? Because we're talking at a point in your trading career where that's sorted out, right? If you do not have that, you have to go back to the drawing table and collect data, of course. So they do not fail because they lack an edge per se, but because they require behaviors that conflict with identity. Most profitable systems, and I think this is for most people the case, they demand a few things. They demand waiting, they demand inactivity, acceptance of randomness, emotional neutrality, very important, and small losses without any reaction, right? Because you want to be able to execute a specific system over and over and over again in the exact same way. And if identity equates activity with competence or losses with failure, execution will collapse automatically, right? And this perfectly explains why traders can follow rules in simulation, right? Let's say you're backtesting. I think a lot of people here are able to backtest their system with their rules perfectly. If they go in bar mode replay and they play it, and I think a lot of people in here can play their systems or trade their systems perfectly and not be affected by anything at all, right? But as soon as we put real risk on the table, it fails, right? And it's a big difference in this because it's real risk that activates identity. Simulation does not at all. A good comparison is which comes from behavioral science, right, and human behavior. And let's say you want to see if someone is lying to you, right? There's always going to be some sort of behavioral sign or body language sign that gives away that someone is lying to you. And not because deception is visible. Deception is not visible. Stress is visible, right? Let's say we have a little thought experiment, and I'll tell you, I'm gonna tell you two sentences. Let's say, you and me, we're sitting next to each other, and I'm gonna tell you two sentences. One is gonna be a lie, and one is gonna be a truth, right? It's gonna be very, very hard to distinguish which sentence is gonna be true and which is fake, because there's no risk to it. If you find out which is fake, okay, congratulations, you won. If you do not, okay, congratulations, I won. But there's no stakes. There's no stakes at all. But when it's a real life situation, when someone's trying to lie to you and deceive you, suddenly there's pressure on top of it because they need to keep the lie alive. And that's when you can suddenly start to spot behavioral patterns, right? It's the same way, the same thing can be translated to trading. Whenever there's simulation, it will never ever be the same as when there's real risk involved. So, what do we need to do? We need to rebuild our identity around execution, right? So, first things first, of course, consistency does not emerge from motivation, right? It emerges from restructuring identity. So, becoming the person that has the capability to become profitable or to be profitable and stay profitable, right? And a functional trading identity includes, knowing that your role is execution and not prediction, right? You're just here to press a button on a system the exact same way over and over again according to a specific data set. So basically all you're trying to do. Knowing that losses are just operational costs. Whenever you run a business, you're going to have operational costs and you're not going to care about it, right? It's going to be very normal to, let's say, have, spend money on ads or spend money on producing your goods or something. You're not going to be like, you're not going to treat it the same way as having a loss in a trading system. And I hope business owners don't treat it that way. Of course, business owners will look to optimize that and lower their costs eventually, right? And I think we'll probably do the same in trading whenever we have a good system, that we're going to refine the system to see if we can maybe, for example, increase win rates or something, right? So you need to understand that inactivity is also part of the system. You need to understand that your performance is measured in behavior and not outcome. And this identity shifts validation from emotional reward to process adherence, right? So when identity finally aligns with probability, where we want to work towards, discipline kind of becomes automatic. Emotions, they no longer have they lose their authority over us. And rules, they no longer feel restrictive, right? Traders start to stop fighting themselves. So just to summarize real quick, what we just talked about is that identity governs behavior more powerfully than knowledge. We know that the ego is a neurological defense mechanism that protects your self-image. And we need to understand that our self-image is not tied to our trading at all, or it shouldn't be. And losses feel personal when identity and performance are fused together, right? So we want to make sure they are not fused together, which could lead to, when they are fused, it would lead to self-sabotage, right? And self-sabotage occurs when success, for example, exceeds nervous system familiarity, which is also not a good step. And we know that psychological homeostasis tries to pull us traders back towards our known emotional states, right? Because our body constantly tries to regulate our emotions by looking for certain things that fix our emotional state, right? Just to let's see if we can find an example. Let's say someone has a is very anxious, right? Let's say someone's very anxious in another part of life. That person will start to do stuff that it knows is not the answer, but it will seek anything that could calm down their nerves, right? Or that could maybe, or the brain understands that a certain outcome will help regulate their emotional state. So we'll do everything it can in our power to lead us to that emotional state. So yeah, strategy, it will fail when identity conflicts with its behavioral requirements. Therefore, right? So what have we learned? Sustainable consistency requires identity expansion, right? Not always more discipline. You can be as disciplined as you want to be in all areas of life, right? If the identity is not aligned with allowing consistent and profitable behaviors, it's unfortunately very, very hard to work out, right? So, mastery is not achieved by controlling the market, it's achieved by stabilizing the system in ourselves that's executing the trades. Let's see, do we have any questions so far, or anyone that wants to share something about their experience, maybe? Or does someone recognize themselves in any of these things? I see a few people are typing. Relatable. Is it? Relatable experience, certainly. Yeah, and I find this topic to be very, very interesting. And the interesting thing is you can extract it. You don't only have to look at it from a trading perspective. It can help you, or it can help you understand why certain behaviors erupt, even in different areas of life. Like I said, with relationships or with work or with any type of confrontation. This kind of stuff always comes back, right? Because at the end of the day, we're humans with our brain, with our ego and identity, and we go through our lives with those parts in every single aspect, right? So whether it's trading or any other aspect, the same things apply and the same things come back. I do see a few people are typing, so I'm curious to see what everyone has to say. You love the idea of understanding true identity. Yeah, it's definitely a very, very interesting topic for sure. Um, let's see what Alex says. I wanted to say that in regards to the baseline that we returned to, I would always have trouble with having a profitable day due to bad habits, over leverage or over trading, and negatively reinforcing those behaviors. The best loser wins. Tom Hargard calls it a bad win. For me, characterizing my trades as good win, good loss, bad loss has helped tremendously in my journaling to help me figure out my behaviors. Interesting. I like that. Um, I'm a fan of indeed logging your behavior and mental states before, during, and after trades, so you can basically see the patterns that happen when you are trading, the patterns that happen in your mind. It's a book, right? Best loser wins. I haven't read it. I think it's a book.
Yep. Incredible book.
Appreciate that, Alex. Appreciate that. Yeah, the Roots of Psychology series is it's coming along nicely now. I think we've covered a lot of stuff. Let's see. Langa Boy says I can talk about ego. Coming into the market with an idea of what I want the market to do, and when it doesn't play as I had thought, I keep looking for the trade that I wanted the market to give me. yeah, that's a very, very common thing to have, right? And it's tied to the ego and the analysis part, right? You have put time and work in being able to, um, you know, increase your skill in analysis. And whenever your brain or you start to see a certain setup form, you kind of want it to be true and you want it to be correct because of the work you've put in, right? And basically, it ties to the fact that we really don't like to be wrong sometimes, right? And we want to be right. And it's kind of at that point you're trying to feed the ego by confirming that you were right at all times, right? Instead of detaching from the outcome, whether you're wrong or right. Um, as I said, we look to attach ourselves to the fact that we are executing a specific system the same way at all times, right? Um, and one way I can, for example, describe it really well is, let's say, um, instead of trading, all we had to do as our job was to look at a screen, and whenever the screen, or look at a lamp or whatever, or a light, and whenever the light turns green, we just press a button, right? And whenever it turns red, we press the second button, right? If that's all we had to do for our job, 5 days a week, I think most of us would be able to do that really, really easily, right? We might get bored, it might get simple, there's not no real excitement going on or whatever. But that kind of is the way we want to see trading and experience trading at the end of the day, right? Where it's just, oh, the light turned green again, I'm gonna press the button. Oh, it turned red again, I'm pressing the other button. That's it, right? You're executing a specific system at the same way over and over and over again. Um, and then it doesn't matter if it's trading or whatever. But yeah, then of course it gets a little bit more complicated because we have to look at live markets. We have to deal with volatile markets that are constantly moving, which triggers our brain to perceive it as a threat. So there's a lot more, you know, happening at the same time. Let's see. Do we have other people that want to add something to this? Also, I want to ask you guys a question. Um, what's the biggest thing you're struggling with right now on the psychological front or on the behavioral side? Um, because I'd like to be able to create a lecture if like, let's say someone has a certain problem or there are certain behaviors that you notice that you have constantly. Let me know and I will do some research and come back with a lecture for you, so you can attend that one, so we can hopefully work on that behavior, or at least provide a framework for it. So if you have any suggestions, make sure to put them in the chat or put them in the general chat and tag me in it. And I will look to add it to the to-do list for the upcoming psychology streams. I do see someone's typing, so we'll wait for that. Let's see. Alex says, I was listening to Jared Tandler as well. He said something that lines up with what you've touched on today, which is that most traders that experience emotional tilt, it's never fight or flight, binary black or white. It's more of a sliding scale where each trigger pushes you further down the emotional curve and the performance curve decreases consequently because you're not as rational as you once were. That's true. And a very good exercise to be able to recognize where you are on that scale is to record yourself, for example, with the camera and all, to analyze your behavior and analyze the steps that happen on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10 steps between being very calm and very rational all the way into complete emotional tilt. Right, and once you identify the steps in between there, you can also identify the point at which it's like a point of no return where you'll slide down the rest of the curve and you're no longer able to get back up to the rational point, right? And then once you identify that point, where that is, you go 1 or 2 steps backwards, and you'll use that step as like the cutoff point because that's where you're still rational, but also able to identify that it's not going well and you are sliding down that emotional slope, and you're still able to save yourself from what's coming next. Yeah, you want to start implementing recording your traits in the audio. That's a good thing to do. Might be very beneficial, especially to identify your own behavior. Yeah, you've come to the realization of what your own threshold is, and it's humbling and eye-opening. Yeah, humbling for sure, but definitely eye-opening. It does help a lot if you're still able to make the conscious choice to stop. Um, that's a very good point to be at. Let's see. Kappa says scalping messes me up a lot instead of being patient and waiting for your model to print. Yeah, because scalping is hard because it's also a very high frequency, right? See, you say social media does more bad than good when you have people clickbaiting. I made 50K today, or just overleveraging in general and setting unrealistic expectations for sustainable trading. Yeah, I think in certain ways it could be very bad indeed. If you have to be constantly, you know, if you constantly see people throwing very large numbers in your face as if it's just very easy, um, yeah, that definitely affects your own behavior sometimes. And it goes back to the ego aspect where you have to humble yourself and drop down from minis to micros to find sustainability. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good step if you know, for some people it really helps to step down to just switch from minis to micros, especially if they're more manageable. Let's see if there's a few more questions or anything, and otherwise we'll likely round up the stream for this lecture, and we'll make sure to post it on YouTube as soon as possible, just in case anyone missed the first half or missed a part. You'll be able to re-watch the stream. Let's see. Not sure if Josh has anything to add further to it. Otherwise, we'll round up the stream soon.
I think it's been a wonderful lecture. There's a lot of things to both resonate with and also internalize. And it's just one of those things that you have to constantly look to get better in the mental aspect of trading. It's
Yeah.
not just about the skill set that you want to possess in terms of like technicals. And the sooner that there's a better balance between the three, which is basically the analyst, the trader, and the manager, um, those are very key components. And I would argue that the analyst, the trader, and the manager all actually have that psychological component to them, because it will creep up on all of them. And when you can kind of understand, which your weakness resides in, and say like, okay, well, is the analyst specifically having, more technical problems, or is it having more psychological problems, or same thing with the trader or the manager? There's skill and psychology involved in all three of those personas, and being able to just identify the areas of improvement in those three personas as a trader is extremely important. And I think that today a lot of people will look to say um, how their identity is as it relates to those three specific components. And then the moment that that's kind of internalized, it gives you a lot of room for improvement on where you want to like basically look to improve. And that's like a huge thing. So terrific stream. Really appreciate you being here. Appreciate everyone else that is also inside of the audience that was able to listen to this stream. And hopefully you guys found it of value. I know I did. And, it's definitely something to come back to and just internalize, because there's a lot of people that will definitely try to like, I won't say sell you a system, but talk to you about a specific system that they trade. And there's very little people that will get into the technical nature of what your brain actually like is doing during those times. And that's what one of these streams are. And yeah, hopefully you guys again found it of value, and look forward to seeing you guys all in the next stream.
Right. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everyone.